Thank you very much. I hope we we can prove that we are not crazy in pursuing the objective of increased settlement efficiency, and that indeed something worth investing effort and resources into, so that we can have, let's say, better services, more competitive services for investors globally. So I'm very pleased to moderate this panel with expert panelists. So I would like now first to ask them to briefly introduce themselves.
Yeah, hello everybody. Good to be here. Thank you to WFC for inviting us. My name is Michelle Hillary. I'm the General Manager for Equity Clearing and Settlement at DTCC.
Thanks, Alina, and very pleased to be here. My name is Charlie Geffen. I chair the UK's Accelerated Settlement Task Force, which was set up in December. And I'd emphasize it's an independent task force, so I'm not here on behalf of the UK government.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Alina. Thanks, the organizers, to this amazing forum. My name is Jesus Sanchez. I'm the head of settlement in SIX, and also chair the EXA Settlement Working Group and the Market Settlement Efficiency Workshop in the T2S.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Miguel Espinosa. I'm the head of the CSD product at Montreal. We are proud sponsors of this event. Thank you.
Thank you all. So, I think we can all agree that settlement efficiency is key for the smooth functioning of the markets. And of course, CSDs play a crucial role in ensuring that settlement is efficient, that there are the needed tools for participants to settle on time. At the same time, we can also acknowledge that there are other factors in play, such as market conditions and also participants' behavior. So I think it would be useful to explore, so to begin by exploring what are the causes of settlement fails in your view. So maybe starting with Jesus.
Well, to be honest, CSDs themselves do not exactly the real reason of a failing. Obviously, we know the nearest reason, because we can see the accounts, we can see the instructions, but at the end, the factual reason which is behind the root cause of the failing only is known, and not all time, by the participants. Sometimes it's even farther than them. But in terms of experience, sharing views with our participants, doing surveys and having common discussions, we can say that the first reason of fails definitely is the lack of securities. The lack of securities, that doesn't mean that the account doesn't have any position or doesn't have any instructions to receive. Sometimes it's true that the account of the participant is pending to receive, so it's supposed to be. That is a kind of change settlement, and sometimes questions different reasons that are behind of the first origin of the change that could be complex, could be not only one single change, but a different part of the change. And this is one of them. The other one, which is not a factual reason, but is a technical one, is the instructions that remain on hold. Many of instructions, to be honest, is a big portion of instructions remain hold. But the question is that we cannot consider that this is a real reason, a factual reason, because the instructions are being held for different reasons, because there is internal processes in the participants, such as credit checks, positions, managing the risk, even the settlement of links instructions, even to remain ready for settlement as a whole, but sometimes it's better to do it afterwards partially, but they try to do it as a whole at the beginning. More or less, these both in combination are the big portion. Other reasons that are behind, and this is the feedback we receive from participants, is that sometimes customers send instructions late for different reasons also. lack of instructions for counterparty, and more or less in combination all of them we have the biggest portion.
Thank you, Jesus. Michelle, what is your experience with the participants?
Well, so I would say that we're all crazy, apparently, because I think no matter what asset class you're looking at, whether you're looking at equities or whether you're looking at fixed income, I think we've created the same situation again and again and again. I would actually back it up a little bit, up the chain a little bit. I think a lot of the problems begin at point of post-trade execution. So just as it's starting to get ready for trading. So for example, your settlement instructions may not be accurate. That's a large reason that we see. And so things just don't move because the settlement instructions aren't in the right space for it to move. Or you disagree with commissions or these sort of trade term type events that then halt the progress forward through to settlement. I think, the other part of this is the allocation process. Are you coming in and doing your allocations? Are the affirmations happening in a timely basis? So to your point, Jesus, are things in the right state so that the instructions can go down to the CSD so that settlement can be effected? I think the other part of it then, again, is the shorts, sort of tying and keying in off of yours. So if you traded short, securities just aren't there necessarily. And I think that the third or fourth point that I would note is I think some parts of the market you have regulation in place that encourages settlement, and in other pockets of the market the regulation is maybe not as supportive of it. So for example, in the US, on the fixed income side, we have a thing called TMPG, Trading Market Practice Group, and they've put in sort of a set of penalties if you fail to deliver. It's 3% minus the effective Fed funds rate with a 1% floor. So there's a cost to failing. Similarly, in the equity space, for anything that's going through a clearing agency, you have Rule 204, which again drives coverage of a position so that you effectively have to make delivery on it. So I think it's a combination of things. There's not any one single thing. You have to look at the picture as a whole, put it all together, and then you've got the jigsaw puzzle of why we're failing.
So indeed, I think we can all agree that the picture is pretty complex, and also what would be challenging for regulators as well is looking at these reasons and assessing which ones may be legitimate reasons due to market conditions, the liquidity of the financial instruments, or other factors that cannot be influenced, and which maybe are reasons that may need to be corrected, or processes that could be rendered more efficient. Charlie, what about you? Has this topic come up during the discussions of the UK Accelerated Task Force, or it's not a topic on the agenda?
Alina, for sure. And indeed, as we do our work, understanding what causes the fails and indeed anticipating what the consequences on fails would be if we were to move to a T+1 is a key issue. I don't think it'll surprise you that it's quite hard to add to what's already been said, entirely consistent with what I've been hearing. I think there was an ESMA survey which said that 70% of fails were due to lack of securities, 27% matching issues. We've had some feedback into the task force. There's a lovely line here. The majority of fails stem from data integrity issues. Now, all of these things could be linked, of course, and one person's data integrity issue could be another person's lack of security. For me, when I come at this fresh, and the conversations I've been having today and yesterday and with colleagues, whatever the detailed issues are, I certainly have a sense that fundamentally there's been a lack of investment in the infrastructure to support the process, to support the post-trade settlement. And whichever way you look, you can look down any particular rabbit hole and identify any particular issue, but when you stand right back from it, it feels to me that there has been a lack of investment in this process. I can assure you or reassure you we've had terrific collaboration, no doubt from some of you and other of your colleagues in the UK. It seems to me there's a highly collaborative, highly professional, super group of people working in this space. but they are underfunded and have been for some time. And I think fundamentally, and I suspect this is a theme that's going to come out, that is one of the main issues.
Thank you. Indeed, some interesting insights, and in particular the point on the data quality across the chain. So also maybe yes, due to the need to have multiple reconciliations among the intermediaries along the chain. And since you mentioned the funding, just to maybe briefly follow up on that point, would you say that the lack of funding is relevant both, let's say, both for CSDs and investment firms, or would you say it's more targeted to certain market participants? So a follow-up question on the no problem. No problem. So on the funding, I was just following up on the funding point you mentioned, which is, I think, a crucial part of the equation. Would you say that the funding issue is something that cuts across the value chain? So is it relevant both at CSD level and the investment firm level, custodian level, or is it more specific to certain types of market participants?
I think it is across the spectrum as far as I can tell. I think we're probably getting more from the buy side in terms of anxiety about the amount of change that is going to have to follow through. And as I say, I think for me it's interesting coming from the outside. If you compare this industry to the healthcare industry, to the hospitality industry, to the transport industry, to the logistics industry, those sectors which are less wealthy than the financial services sector operate on effectively a 24/7 system. They don't worry that if they get an instruction through from the other side of the world at the wrong time on a Thursday, it has to wait until Monday or Tuesday on a public holiday. That would be unthinkable for those sectors. That's just an observation from somebody looking in from the outside. And I'd like to emphasize, I do think the people that we're engaging with are super collaborative. They're working incredibly hard. But the institutions that they have been working for seem to me to have had a mismatch in their capex against their depreciation. And the depreciation, however you measure it, and you can't measure it, I think, in too narrow a financial way, but if you look at depreciation and the legacy systems across the sector, there hasn't been enough capex over the last decade, or others will have a better view on this than I do, to meet the changes that will be coming. I can't predict for certain where the UK will come out on the task force that I'm leading, but it seems to me highly likely that the direction of travel is to T+1 and T+0. And that simply isn't going to happen without quite a lot of investment and hard work. And it seems to me there needs to be a mechanism to make that happen.
Thank you. Miguel, what is your take on the reasons for settlement fails? Do you have any insight also from a technical perspective? And
yes, actually, from our side, from Montreal, what we usually see as a vendor, as a basically CSD solution provider, we have different discussions with our clients, and of course the reasons for the failure, I think they have been already highlighted, especially when it comes to security side, lack of securities. It's minimum usually the lack of clash, because usually there are several facilities for liquidity management applicable for the different participants, but then it's also as Michel was mentioning, it's important to consider that accuracy of the different settlement instructions, and that's something that most of our clients are usually struggling with, and making sure, and across the board we have seen different solutions, and we have been trying to address the different situations. I don't know, we have allegements, we have different technical features that are trying just to at least highlight, okay, there are this information, it's not incomplete, so the idea is try to, by the time when we get to the settlement date, we have enough information, and the transaction are, at least to the best of our knowledge, will be ready for settlement. So from a technical point of view, we are usually trying to provide solutions in order to address that clearing process that sometimes it even as Jesus was mentioning, even the participants don't necessarily know in some of the cases.
Thank you. That is a good transition to the next question, which refers to the tools that can be used to improve settlement efficiency. And actually, we have a poll for the audience. So if we can show the question on screen. So we would like to ask you to select 3 tools which you think are the most effective to improve settlement efficiency. So you have several examples, such as partial settlement, securities lending and borrowing, pre-funding, cash penalties, shaping, the use of RTGS, the use of several settlement batches per day, a shorter settlement cycle, and instant settlement. So the poll will be open for a few minutes, and then we will discuss the results. So it will be interesting to see which tools are in the top for the audience. So let's wait a few minutes and maybe already, Miguel, going back to you in the meantime. So what, in addition to the tools listed on screen, what other tools are out there?
No, I think that a key important role, I know that it's quite common for most of the CSDs in here, it's the use of netting, basically. We need to rely a lot on netting, and that's why even today in the morning there were a lot of discussions on different strategies for DLT and other technologies that can help, but still, when we get to the nitty-gritty of things, we need always to consider that a key tool, let's say, but more than a tool, it's the settlement, how it's performed. It's usually that either bilateral, multilateral netting, and or technical netting. Regardless how it's performed, it's critical on how we perform all the operations there.
Thank you. Jesus, what tools are you using?
Well, among all of this that has been mentioned here in the question, probably the most appreciated one by the participant is the partial settlement. The partial settlement, although is not the paradise, because the partial settlement allows to settle partially. So in terms of volume, it doesn't increase the settlement efficiency, but in terms of amount, which is absolutely important, it's clearly a very good tool in order to improve the settlement efficiency. Another question is that partial settlement on a standalone is not enough. Clearly, the partial release, in case that the instruction is held, is very important, because if not, at the end, you have to cancel instruction and send a new one with all the issues that we are having and the long discussion that we are having in Europe. No? So it's very important that both features are used on combination in order to optimize them. And the other one is, it's good because it's the second one.
As you can see, yes,
it's the securities lending and borrowing.
The audience confirms your
okay.
assessment.
So securities lending and borrowing was the other one that I was going to mention. Great, now it's improving. So, because honestly speaking, in terms of assets, sometimes it's not enough just to do a good position management. Also, you need to cover at the end the short positions or the instructions that are pending to be received, and unfortunately, finally, they are not received.
So we can see indeed that so partial settlement is at the top, together with securities lending and borrowing, and I think, well, maybe in a way a bit surprisingly, cash penalties. So and pre-funding. So this would be the top. It's interesting to see that, yes, cash penalties, which is also a regime recently introduced in the EU, seems to appear as effective when reducing settlement fails. Michelle, what is your view?
So I don't think I'm surprised by anything that I'm seeing up on the screen. What I would say is, when you think about something like securities lending and borrowing, there is a balance sheet impact to that. So I think to make that truly effective, you have to enable it so that it's coming in through CCP services or central counterparty services. And in that way, you're delivering an effective tool against settlement, but doing so in an economical and capitally sensible way for the market participants. The thing that wasn't on the screen when you talk about tools is the effective use of technology. So, I do go harkening back to sort of my original points on why these fails happen. I do think that embedding straight through automation and straight through processing on into the workflow, getting those agreements up front, so well ahead of actual settlement date, is a tool that I would call out that wasn't on the list.
So certainly a very good point, and we will touch upon this a bit later. But before that, to give the floor to Charlie on the reduced settlement cycle. This was listed as one of the tools that could help with settlement efficiency. However, I don't know if surprisingly or not, it didn't rank very high. What do you think about that?
I mean, I wasn't that surprised, actually, to see it down there because, it's challenging. I mean, I think it's easy for me to sit here and say that if a shorter settlement cycle was achieved, it would be achieved by a lot of hard work and investment. And once achieved, I'm sure settlement failures would improve and the process would improve. But that's going to require an awful lot of hard work between now and then. And I think certainly we're in a world of evolution, not revolution. We've seen what the US is doing, and chatting before, it's pretty clear that the US being the US, it will stick to its guns, and it will move to T+1 in May next year, and there will be a lot of boots on the ground and no doubt a lot of money spent on it, but it will happen. Europe and the UK operate slightly differently, but it seems to me that there is a direction of travel here which is not going to change. Looking at that list, it is interesting to me because one of the issues we've certainly identified is the challenges around stock lending, securities lending in a shorter settlement cycle. And that's one of the sort of 4 or 5 issues that we have identified which is clearly of concern to people. And just on partial settlements, I mean, one of the notes that I had that somebody mentioned to me was the point that currently partial settlement is not mandatory, I think is right, and if it was mandatory, that might make a difference to its efficacy.
So, since you mentioned the US approach, Michelle, do you want to give us a brief update on the situation and the plan for the US to move to T+1?
Sure, I'm more than happy to do so. So I think probably most people in the audience are aware that the US is moving to T+1, and the date is May 28th, 2024. This is following a lot of conversation that happened within the industry, and really the motivation for moving to T1 was not necessarily grounded in settlement efficiency, it was more grounded in risk management, and in addition to that, capital and liquidity efficiency. So I think the motivators are a little different. I do think that shortening the settlement cycle, when it's harmonized across all of the major locations around the world, will lend itself towards some settlement efficiency, though in the short term, to your point, it may introduce some difficulties. Briefly, the rule was adopted earlier on this year. It lays out the date. It lays out the conditions that broker-dealers are going to have to abide by. In terms of record keeping, it lays out a cutoff for affirmations on midnight of T, though in order to have that flow through DTC straight through processing, it is going to be 9 p.m. Eastern time on T, with the allocations being at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And I think that that's one of the parts that we try to emphasize as an organization. Nothing happens until the allocation happens, so you really have to pay attention to that as the most critical time, probably, so that the other downstream workflows can happen. So we're moving ahead, as we said. I don't think that there's going to be a shift in the date. We're certainly not getting any indication that there is, and I think that the industry is really coming together in a very robust way to work towards that. From a testing point of view, DTCC will have its environments available for testing come mid-August to to allow this for sort of very extended period of testing, 9 months in total, where we'll have 2-week schedules of repeating 21 2-week schedules.
And what is the scope of the securities covered by this requirement?
Yeah, there's a list out there. There's a whole lot of information out there on a site called ust1.org. So the very, very detailed list of what's covered by this you can find on that. But broadly speaking, it's whatever is available for settlement at DTC.
Okay, so a broad scope indeed. Maybe because this is of course a relevant discussion for the EU and for other countries across the globe. It would be interesting, for instance, to see whether it may be worth tackling different types of asset classes, so to have different, let's say, requirements for the settlement cycle depending on the asset class. Maybe on this, Jesus, what is your view for the EU? Do you think we could go for a big bang approach across all asset classes, or it may be better to potentially consider different approaches by type of asset class?
To be honest, I think it's difficult to say. And one thing that we want to highlight is that currently in the CSDs, in the current technology, we are not, obviously, it has been interesting that I have heard this in one of the previous panel, that with the current technology, CSDs are able to settle even in T+0. T+1, of course. So at the end, it's not a question of technology. It's not a question of CSDs. It's a question that probably are not only related to asset types that you are asking. Sorry, but I don't want to escape of the question. It's just because I want to do a kind of background. The question is that it's important that the participants are well informed enough, clearly have enough time with their clients, with the background clients, in order to check all the difficulties that they could find in case that we go following the proposal from the states to move to T+1. No, this is more than related to asset classes. Obviously, probably fixed income is another question because it's more steepy. You can say the markets are more steepy, but I wouldn't like to say that absolutely in absolute terms. More is a question of timing, education in the positive way with clients.
Yes, Charlie, what is the UK approach to this?
I just wanted to add really that this is an issue that's definitely on our radar. And of course, we're in a new world compared to the one where we all moved from T+3 to T+2. And if you're sitting in the UK, and you'll remember that the move to T+2 was on an EU-wide basis, at which point, of course, the UK was a part of that system. But today, of course, you have a considerable number of securities, the Eurobond market in particular, which trades in London and settles in Brussels. So whilst my intelligence is the same as yours, which is your industry is well capable of settling on T+1, should the UK do that by reference to trading venues? What is an open question is what that would do to liquidity pools and indeed what that would do to the market if we were in a world where the Eurobond market had a choice of settling on T+1 or T+2. I don't know what the answer to that is.
These are all very interesting questions, and I guess you're also assessing yes, like you said, the impact for UK firms of whether or not to wait to move at a later stage to T+1, and whether I don't know if you're considering let's say the impact, the current impact for UK firms, considering that the US will move to T+1, in terms of the exposure that UK firms have in the US, and whether it's more or less costly to move at the same time as the US market will move, or whether it's better to wait. I
mean, we're sort of beginning to drift into the next question, but I can say, I think, with a high degree of confidence that the UK won't be moving to T+1 in May next year. You'll be relieved to hear, I'm sure. But of course, these are the issues in the end, because they go to how and when and phasing rather than if. And I think probably there is a pretty strong consensus within the UK market participants that a move to T+1 needs to happen at some point. So I suspect our report will focus on how that should happen and when that should happen. And there are important differences between London and the US. When you're sitting in London, you tend to look at the US, and I'm going to see what reaction I get here, as largely a domestic market. Whereas London is absolutely not a domestic market. London is a global marketplace. And therefore, there are important considerations where you've got participants who are subject to different regulation, are trading in multiple currencies, and indeed, there are multiple securities settling and trading in different venues. So I think understanding those issues, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to do it, but I think they will be key to the question as to whether the UK chooses to align with the EU or with the US, and whether that's for some or all securities. I mean, obviously in the UK, largely equities trade in London and settle in London, but that's not exclusively the case.
Michelle, I see you want to react.
Yeah, well, we do obviously have a large global footprint. I think when you think of the US market, it's clearly dominated by US participants, despite the fact that many of our members do have a large global presence. And so I think the one caveat would be that we do recognize that we are appreciative of the complexity that this is introducing to those global markets. I think the other thing to remember, and big distinction between the US and Europe and or London, is we have a single depository and we have a single CCP in that handle equities. And so I think not taking back any of the complexity of what we're doing in the US, but I do think that that's an additional layer that we don't have to consider as much as you do in Europe.
And I mean, just add to that, I mean, of course, dominated by a single currency. So that makes a difference to Europe.
That's indeed a good point, and yes, we have similar considerations to take into account in the EU with an even more complex setup, multiple CSDs, multiple trading venues, different currencies. So indeed, this makes the assessment more complex. Miguel, turning to you now, what tools or how can you help market participants, let's say from a technical perspective, how can you help with the potential move to a shorter settlement cycle and with a broader issue of increasing settlement efficiency?
Well, as Jesus just mentioned, I think that it's important to realize that from a technological point of view, we have solutions that can handle T+0, T+1, T+2. For us, it's kind of relatively transparent. But we need to understand that in the end, it has to be a consensus across the market, and I think that's the challenge there, because it's not like we reached T+2 because there were some technical constraints in the past. It was actually because there are a lot of back office processes that need to be performed. There's a lot of liquidity management that also each one of the participants and stakeholders need to do. So in order to reach that level of consensus, there's of course a lot of discussions, and I'm pretty sure that each one of the markets that are represented here know how hard it is to get to the participants and to discuss with them. Because in our case, what we can try to encourage from a technical point of view, it's, as Michelle was saying, focus on that straight-through processing. Because thinking about T+1, okay, it's one day, but most of the participants need to think about it as T+0 in the end, because that means that they need today as soon as a trade has been matched, they need to start that process. And in order to do that, they need to have the data almost or near real time. They need to have the relevant tools, they need to have the relevant systems to make sure that they have as much as possible automated in order to reach that level of efficiency.
Indeed, so the tools are out there, but there needs to be, let's say, first of all, there needs to, resources need to be allocated to to acquire the tools or to optimize existing systems. And yes, there needs to be an incentive to do that at the end of the day. So I guess that's what we will be looking at also in the coming months and years. The conclusion of the ongoing assessments will be whether or not to make this mandatory or to leave it as it currently is, as a choice for market participants. So, so going back to the US, you had a strong incentive. Regarding that incentive, how did you, let's say, come to the conclusion that it's the right move in terms of liquidity management and, let's say, collateral management?
Yeah, so it's a great question because it is at the heart and the bottom of why we're doing this. So, I think many people are familiar with CCPs as sort of the layer above the CSD. And the US during the COVID period, and then further into a year following the meme stock period, we did see quite a large, increase in the amount of cash we were holding in the clearing fund. I think this was common across all of the markets, and so it's not a unique story to the US. But coming out of that, I think you have to look and say, well, what would have happened had we been in a T1 settlement cycle? And it is quite substantial. We're estimating somewhere, in the 30% reduction in clearing fund, 35, somewhere in that range, which puts a lot of, cash back into the markets for use in other ways. So coming out of those two events, we took the time to say, if we are as an industry, and you've heard this in the earlier panels, at this inflection point when it comes to modernizing our systems, and we know that we have this cost on the industry, is this the moment to sort of shift and look at T1? So the industry came together in, I believe, if I'm remembering this right, 2020. Over the summer of 2020, and we did a really robust, detailed examination of should we go to T1, should we go to T0. It engaged every constituent or every group within the industry. It was a very broad, a very detailed conversation, and the consensus around that was the move to T1 is the right one. We weren't going to leap straight to T0. That was going to be a much higher lift, a much harder lift, whereas T1 felt like we were going to get an awful lot of benefits in terms of not just the clearing fund and capital, but also in terms of our ability to introduce automation, our ability to ensure that we were really adhering to things like standardization across the marketplace. And so really realize those benefits in a way that while it was going to encourage investment and require investment, the investment was something that could be manageable within a reasonable time frame.
So since you mentioned T0, do you think that is the next logical step? And if so, what would be the timeline, your estimate?
So that is not, I think from a US perspective, we're quite happy at where we are right now. We're very focused on getting T1 successfully done. I think any conversations around T0 would be following a successful implementation of T1, should there even be conversations around that. I'll leave that up to the industry to first of all, to collectively agree that that's something we should be doing. And what form of it, I think, is to be determined. There's so many flavors of T0 that are out there. I think a lot of analysis would need to be done to ensure that we were hitting the one that was going to be beneficial as well as effective, in reducing costs and things. So there's a significant cost-benefit analysis that would need to be done before we ever go. So let's get T1 done first, and then we can move on.
Yes, that sounds reasonable. But since we know that instant or atomic settlement is a promise of new technologies such as DLT, I think it would be good to discuss a little bit what is the potential or the benefits that new technologies can bring, and in terms of also improving settlement efficiency. So, Miguel, over to you first.
Well, I think that we don't necessarily need to repeat what has been discussed throughout the morning today. We know that there are several benefits, and honestly, for us as vendors, as solution providers, we are always happy to, okay, there's a new market that we can get into, and that we can, and that's why we also have our own proof of concepts. We also have our own laboratories that we have done. We have discussions with several clients when it comes especially to DLT technologies and digital assets and so on. But I think that when it comes to, as I mentioned before, I think that still with the current infrastructure, with the current systems, we are able to cover the needs for T+1 and technically speaking T+0. But operationally and what it actually means to go to T+0, and also from all the risk that is involved, and also what the participants and stakeholders would need to achieve to get there, of course, it's a different discussion. But that's why when we're talking about new technology, I think that we should bank on the existing technologies, in a sense that we nowadays, for instance, AI, it's very prominent. And we can use data, because in the end, especially here with the CSD entities, CSD on their own have a lot of data for many years, and using that data, we can bank on that data to make sure we can maybe consider using settlement forecasts. We can even using AI, we can do prediction to see, okay, out of the trades that I have in T+1 or T+2, what is the actual possibility for that trade to actually settle. So those are some areas that we can always consider. Because on the other hand, especially from our side, what we can mention is that we have been contacted, I think especially since COVID, I would say, about cloud. I think that in the past, before, when we were discussing with our customers, all of them were like, no, and the regulator will not ever approve us having a data center that it's managed by us, and the data, we need to have it there. And then COVID and of course, even as we were listening yesterday, some geopolitical problems and the war that was there made participants think, and actually we have now moved, some of our clients started switching to cloud more like a backup solution, but nowadays we have even participants that are running fully on cloud. So it's again, I think that from a technology point of view, we need to bank on the existing and what we have right now, and make sure that we use those tools.
So use new technologies to support existing ones, and to gradually enhance existing market setups. This is the message I get from you. Jesus, what do you think about using new technologies? Can they help or create more problems?
Well, with regards to DLT, in theory, everybody says yes. But let me express that the current technology, as I mentioned before, allows us to be very efficient. So I think the failings, as I mentioned before, are not being due to the lack or less modern technology than the current DLT discussions. Sometimes I think the adults behave like kids, that we have a toy, new toy, and we play with that, and afterwards, a few years after, oh, come on, it's enough. I need a new one, no? And now we have DLT, and now everybody's eager to see, to assess. Honestly speaking, I'm a student of DLT, I have to be honest. I have some age, and now it's difficult for me, but okay. And it's true that obviously we do not have to avoid to see all the potential benefits of that. For sure it is. But for example, and I fully agree with some of the colleagues that mentioned before in the panel, that probably DLT could help in other areas than the pure settlement. For example, in case of, as Miguel mentioned, the intelligent IEA, probably in the management of the corporate actions, in the pre-issuance and issuance processes, probably more than in the pure settlement, probably they will have more benefits, they will bring more benefits than the management of the settlement, or the performance of the settlement. But in any case, also another question that for me is something that we have to deeply investigate a little bit more is with regards to the efficiency on the settlement. With the DLT, probably sometimes the so real basis, so real settlements, sometimes forget the optimization. They need to optimize because there are plenty of change, as I mentioned before. So sometimes you have the instructions, everything is there, but the situation is blocked. So, and for example, NTS, night and settlements, optimization models, and all of these questions, and probably AI could bring benefits here for the optimization, probably. So it's very important that we take this into consideration.
These are good points indeed, and I think we also need to take into account the management of any project. So especially if you have invested in technology, you need to at least to reap the benefits of that technology, and to like you also said, you can improve upon that technology, but maybe it doesn't make sense to completely change it the next day. So I think there needs to be somewhere a trade-off. And to choose the right time to invest in dramatic changes. So maybe that's not an easy decision to make. So maybe indeed the more prudent approach is to take it one step at a time, and to gradually improve by building on the existing technology. Michelle, what is your view?
Can I jump in on this one? I guess two things. First, on cloud, DTCC uses private cloud for our production systems, built in a containerized type way, so that we can easily, at some point, if we need to or want to, port it over to public cloud. But I think that the point I want to bring out in that is not necessarily, to your point, it's not an all or nothing. So for example, in your lower environments, there is an opportunity to use public cloud and get the efficiencies and the cost benefits of it in those types of environments while operating differently in production. And then again, based on various asset classes and conditions, it may be for some aspects of the business, but not other aspects. So I think any one of these technologies, whether it be DLT or whatever, there's a way of implementing it that can lend itself benefit to you, and it's not necessarily all in. So I think we just, as a CSD, have to be considering what are the creative ways we can implement so that we do deliver some levels of efficiency without introducing any risk associated with that efficiency. The other thing I would just add in on AI is I do think that we have to be really careful to ensure that we have a very robust governance structure around that. And as we're building out our models, we have great care in ensuring that we're not introducing bias into those models. I think it's really exciting, some of the work that's going on right now. I can't wait to see where we are even 6 months from now. But I do think that it's incumbent upon us to be very careful about how we're employing it right from the beginning, so that we don't diminish our value as a CSD, and we don't diminish the resiliency and the safety and security and soundness that we provide by being a CSD using AI.
Yes, very, very important points. Also thinking about liability and yes, also some ethics considerations. So a complex but interesting topic. Certainly not an easy one to solve. Charlie, what is your view?
Thanks, Alina. I think it's interesting. When we've been looking at it, certainly from a UK perspective, I think there are points in time which are inflection points where you get step changes in any industry. And my sense is at the moment that we're at that moment, certainly from a UK perspective, because there's a lot of effort and thought being put into the capital markets generally in the UK. I think it's sometimes easy for us to forget in the UK and in Europe of the huge benefit we have of seeing the US go first. It is the world's dominant market. It invests far more money than anybody else does in these systems. The technology is going to evolve and be tried and tested in the US. I 100% agree on the governance issues. But I think that the direct answer to the question, what is the potential of new technology, is absolutely enormous. It must be enormous. I mean, in between the questions, I can get out my iPhone and buy securities as a retail investor. I could buy an airline ticket home before the next question comes back to me. It's extraordinary that we're even talking about it in the century we're in, using technology which still involves faxes and PDFs and Excel sheets and so on. So I think it's all coming together, and I don't mean to be critical about it because I well understand the pressures that exist in terms of allocating capital to systems and so on. But eventually there comes a moment when you have to grip it. And my sense is that over the next few years, this will be that moment.
Jerome, Alina, I think I want to remark what Michelle has mentioned before. I think it's very important. It's like the medicine, like the drugs. When a drug is good for everything, it's very light good. But when you have a specific drug for something, it's when it's stronger and it's good. I think we have to go in that direction, because now speaking about DLT or AI, cloud or whatever for everything, I think probably is not the best way to use all the powerful. No? So I think we have to check, we have to see the business case and focus on that.
Indeed, I think we need to be looking at tailored solutions that fix specific problems and that do so in an effective way, but also making sure that the related risks are managed. Yes, so it's again, it has to be a decision that is taken on a case-by-case basis, ultimately by everyone, and taking also into account, let's say, the overall setup, but also like the potential, yes, but making sure that what the new technology brings is done in a risk-controlled manner and brings benefits for the stakeholders, but also while looking forward, not creating additional issues, maybe some of which we haven't even discovered yet. So we are really treading on new ground. So we all have to be, let's say, on a learning curve. So Miguel, I see you want to add.
No, I think that when it comes to technologies, the point is that that's why I don't think that we should necessarily go back and discuss what the panels in the morning cover. But again, it's just finding that specific business case where we can find the right use of it. Actually, just maybe over a month ago, on another conference in the Americas, I was really pleased to see, for instance, what the DTCC actually has been doing with I think it's Project Ion. It's quite amazing, and they managed to prove that some of the barriers that some people consider are not necessarily there, but still, they and even right now, I think that with their implementation, they are able to have a parallel with maintaining still the golden source and the traditional technologies, let's say. So again, it's just to make sure that we find those processes that where there's a pain point that we need to address. It's not necessarily let's just jump and go in all of our core operations into DLT because, as Jesus was saying, it's a new toy. And again, as a software vendor, we are happy to play with you, but still, I think it's important to make sure that we get that right business process in place first.
Indeed. Maybe let's see if we have any question from the audience at this stage. So If no question, then if I may, so there is a question. Yes, James.
Yes, thank you. James Cunningham, BNY Mellon. So thank you very much for the interesting session. The question actually that comes to mind, I mean, we've talked about, clearly, let's see what happens in the US first, and that's clearly a very, very valuable data point. And we also said it's not so much a question of if, but it's a question of when. So my real question to the panel is really, what's the answer to that question? When will and should the EU move to T+1? And when will and should the UK move to T+1? And perhaps a subsidiary question, should it be the same date? Thank you.
Thank you, James. Maybe Charlie first, over to you.
I think that's why I got the call from the Treasury to try and answer that question. We've got to work it out. I mean, as I said earlier, it's clearly not going to be May next year. It's obviously for others to determine what the EU chooses to do. And I mean, Alina is a good person to give us some guidance on what's happening there. And as I alluded to earlier, I think at least one of the issues around alignment, and there are, I've had plenty of input on the importance of alignment with the US, let alone the EU, but that illustrates the different position London is in compared to the US because it faces both ways. And of course, you've got the whole Eurobond market, effectively trading in London and settling in the EU. So there are issues there where I have asked the same question to you, to the people who in your sector and around your stakeholders and the market participants, and they don't seem to know the answer. So we're going to have to work it through. And there was going to be a question about what advice do we have to improve settlement efficiency in this discussion, to which my answer is engagement. I think we need as much input as possible, and if there's anyone here or any of you got stakeholders who haven't been in touch with us, please do, because I think this question of alignment is right at the core of timing. There's foreign exchange issues as well, there's stock lending issues, but essentially it's this question of alignment.
Oh, yes, I couldn't agree more. So with my ESMA hat on, I think it's certainly something we will be looking into. And indeed, as a, I would say, preliminary view on this, yes, having alignment has its benefits. So I don't think we can align, I mean, objectively speaking, I don't think we can align with the US move, but I think, yes, it may be possible to align with the UK. So let's see. I think there will still be work to be done, and we will closely engage with market participants to conduct a thorough analysis in the coming month. We'll see.
You allow me, James. I think you're right. It's a question of when, but honestly speaking, for me there is another one question important: how. And to be honest, as Jesus Benito was mentioning in the previous panel, from a regulatory point of view, and I think it's not exactly the regulatory question, this is true, but we are a bit exhausted about all changes that we had to do at the same time with 2 or 3 orchestras that we were speaking about before, you remember, about the music question. That we have to handle everything at the same time. So it's a question that if the regulatory or is being leadering in Europe by the ESMA or European Commission or whoever, we have to be careful with the timing, because the timing is important in order to allow us enough time to coordinate with our clients, with communities. As Michel mentioned, DTC is just one CSD. In Europe, we have some of them more. So it's important that we highlight this question, and we have to be careful. It's not a question of only when, it's only how we have to do it.
Yes. Thank you. And just a final word of advice from the panelists. I think we heard from Charlie, Michel.
So I would say I don't think settlement efficiency is necessarily the CSD to solve. I think it's really about the market participants really taking an examination of the points in the system where there's blockage and where things are not operating in an effective way, and then taking actions and steps to take that. So I think you have to go to the market to solve this more than the CSD.
Jesus, your advice to improve settlement efficiency?
It's a question that it's a community. We as a community, it's not only CSDs, as I mentioned all the time. It's not a question that CSDs has to do many things. It's a question of the community together involved. We can improve many.
Miguel?
Yeah, I think that it has been covered that communication is key in this case, all across the different players across the market. And then, of course, I think that another important aspect to consider to improve all the efficiency, it's that to get as close as possible to that true SDP from end to end, because that's there's a missing link. And I know, again, going back to the different technologies, I know that some of them can help for some specific scenarios. So again, it's to focus on that high level of automation and proper straight-through processing.
So communication, cooperation, and working towards shared goals. With this, I think we can conclude this panel. I would like to thank the panelists for their contribution and wish you a good rest of the conference.